Thank you all. Thank you again.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hey.
Well, so much has happened. We've heard a lot of very interesting speakers today, but there's a lot of news also happening out there today. I just came from the United Nations, and the president most likely wanted to have a victory lap, the Iran deal, the Cuba negotiations. At the same time, a very difficult meeting with Vladimir Putin, and today, with no warning, airstrikes. What can you tell us?
Well, we did have a heads up that it was coming, and I guess I'd go back to what you said. It's far too early for a victory lap, far too young in the administration for that. We still have another whole year and a month to go before the election. So I think the president did want to have an opportunity to address the UN. Here it is, a 70th anniversary. He's addressed it each year since he's been in office, and to set forth the progress we've made, but he also is very clear about the challenges that lie ahead. So I think it was a productive last 10 days between the visit with the Pope Francis, and the way our country welcomed him, the state visit with the President Xi of China, and then the UN. So I think it was pretty successful last 10 days.
This audience has heard speakers, including Mitt Romney and John McCain, strongly criticize the president's foreign policy. How can you, respond to that, to the criticism by a bipartisan congressional committee of the war against ISIS? The perception that ISIS is winning on the ground, that our airstrikes are not effectively preventing jihadis from joining the group, and that we don't have a plan for Syria.
Look, this is a tough piece of business. It's going to require a lot of hard work over a sustained period of time with a coalition that's ever growing and ever stronger. And so no one said this was going to be easy. And so I think it's very easy to be critical from, in a sense, the cheap seats. But what the president is committed to doing every day is everything possible to keep America safe. He had, as you know, when he was up in New York, an entire session focusing on how can we combat extremists, and particularly ISIL, and what are we going to do collectively together. And so it would be much more constructive, I think, if those folks would join our effort, and let's really work together to try to keep America safe.
How concerned is the president about the kind of rhetoric that's being used in the campaign this year, particularly anti-Muslim rhetoric?
Well, I'll say this to you, Andrea, having had the privilege of participating in two presidential campaigns, the last two campaigns, my observation is what tends to resonate with the American people is somebody who really sees the United States as a diverse country where diversity is a strength. We've always been the nation that people the world over gravitate towards, a nation of immigrants. And that's something that we should celebrate. I think in the last two elections, the reason why the president won once, not once, but twice, is because his message is one that pulls our country together. And it's a unifying message where we feel as though we're all in this together. We all have a stake in our future. And so I think that that's actually, in the end, what the American people gravitate towards. And this other more destructive rhetoric is there's really no place for that in our democracy.
Are you surprised about the Pope's private visit with Kim Davis, the clerk in Kentucky, who is defying the Supreme Court and arguably not doing her job, but standing up for her view of what religious freedom is?
Well, obviously, we believe strongly in religious freedom, and we also believe that public officials have to comply with the law, and they have to comply with the Constitution. As I said at the outset, we have a terrific visit with the Pope. I think he and the president share common values, their priorities, everything from climate change to equality and justice and providing opportunities to those who are less fortunate. I think that the United States, both here in Washington, D.C., and New York, and in Philadelphia, welcomed the Pope. And I think, as the president said yesterday, the law enforcement led by Secret Service did a tremendous job of keeping not only the Pope safe, but the millions of Americans who wanted to get as close as they could to him. So overall, it was a very positive visit.
The experience that you had, that you were able to share with the Pope, what do you think is what was completely different about this experience? You've been through so many.
I've met some extraordinary people, but there was just something about his spirit. And I'm a non-Catholic, and sitting in his presence and listening to his message, a hopeful message, a message that really lifted up everyone and saw the value. I was brought to tears when I saw him at the prison. And, you know, President Obama just recently visited a federal penitentiary in Oklahoma, El Reno prison, and I watched the president's conversation with those who were incarcerated, and to see the reaction on the faces of the inmates when the Pope grabbed their hand, and it was really very moving. And you're right, I've seen a lot, but every day there's something that happens that makes me just pinch myself, and meeting him was a real privilege.
And being on the Hill when he was in Congress that day, I found so elevating and extraordinarily moving. And then barely 24 hours later, we see Congress, at least, you know, the departure, the resignation of John Boehner. What is your diagnosis right now about what ails our politics in both parties?
How much time do you have?
Oh, about 13 minutes and 59 seconds.
Yeah, all right. So look, it's disheartening, to say the least. One of the things that I really enjoy about my job is that I get to work with all of the elected officials outside of Congress, so the mayors and the governors, president speaking momentarily to a group of state legislators from around the country who've been working with us on everything from raising the minimum wage to paid leave, paid sick leave, early child education, making community colleges free for the first couple of years, a whole range of issues that the American people really care about. And I think what is disappointing to me is when I see just the amount of time that Congress wastes, where they could be doing the people's business. I mean, just think about, I lost count after 54 votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act. So what if you added up all those hours and you really focused on issues that we care about? So I think it's troubling that we will reach out and look forward to working with whoever the next speaker is. That's the president's commitment since the day he was elected, and that's what we do. But it's telling that there's going to be a change. It really is quite telling.
How concerned are you about the Democratic race right now and the polling that shows Hillary Clinton losing ground in the polls? Another email released today. There'll be 4 more releases of emails before the Iowa caucuses. So as she herself acknowledges, this is a drip, drip, drip. Well,
if one were to go back at this time in the 2008 campaign, I'm sure that there were people who would say there's no way that then Senator Obama will ever be elected. And so I don't spend a lot of time focusing on the daily tracking polls or the ups and downs of the presidential race, because as I said, we still have time, a great deal of time left, and a lot of hard work to do. So I think it is a marathon, and I think there will be ups and downs in the course of the next several months and year ahead, and in the end, it's going to be up to the American people. And we think that what the president has done over the last 8 years, if you just think about what was going on, I think sometimes people forget we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. Our unemployment rate went up to over 10%. It's now down to 5.1. We had banks on the verge of collapse. Our entire economy was heading into a depression, and we were able to stave that off thanks to the hard work of a lot of Americans, our businesses, the president's leadership, I strongly believe. And so we've made a great deal of progress. And so our challenge for the next year plus that the president is in office is to continue that trajectory, because as we often say, in our country, talent is ubiquitous. It's part of what makes our country so great, but opportunity is not still available for everybody. And so my point to you is we're still focusing on a lot of hard work to create that opportunity for every American. And I believe that that is the vision that the majority of Americans will support at the end of the next campaign.
Obviously, the president would want his legacy to be continued, to be expanded upon by a Democrat inhabiting the White House.
Absolutely.
According to the latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, the best Democrat to go up against any of the top-tier Republicans in hypothetical matchups right now would be Joe Biden, not Hillary Clinton.
Well, again, you're speculating, and Vice President Biden hasn't even made up his own mind whether or not he's entering the race. So a hypothetical poll today doesn't really mean very much when you don't even know whether he's in the race. So let's see who ends up in the race. And then, of course, whoever the Democratic whoever wins the nomination, that's who the president will support in the next election.
He could shut down the speculation right now because he is taking more from Clinton's support than from Bernie Sanders' support. He could shut down the speculation if he were ruling it out. He's clearly doing what one would do.
We're talking about the vice president?
The vice president. He's doing what you would do if you want to have that option. and leave it open?
I
Talking to
think-
people, talking to money people?
I think what the vice president has said publicly is the same thing that I've heard him say privately, which is that he really doesn't know what he wants to do. Look, he had a devastating, devastating loss. I can't even imagine as a parent what he's going through this not that long ago in early summer, late spring. And so I think it's reasonable for him to say, look, I need a moment to decide whether I can do this, whether my family can do this, whether I have the fight in me at this moment in time to enter the race. And I think we should all give him the time to figure that out on his own.
The president has said that the best political decision he ever made was choosing Joe Biden as his vice president. How hard would this be for Barack Obama to have his vice president running against his former Secretary of State?
An embarrassment of riches in the Democratic Party is always a good thing. Having great candidates, I think, is always a healthy thing. So I think the president will be fine with whatever two really qualified people decide to do. It's such a personal decision. Goodness knows there were a lot of people who said to him, don't run, you could never win, and they discouraged him. So I think he believes that everybody should get to make that decision for themselves.
One of the main reasons why Hillary Clinton has been suffering in the polls is this email controversy. She has said repeatedly, it was allowed, it was permitted, it wasn't the right thing to do, I made a mistake, but it was allowed. Weren't there guidelines from the White House to all cabinet secretaries?
Well, yes, there were.
To use government email?
Absolutely. We feel, obviously, we want to make sure that we preserve all government records, and so there was guidance given that government business should be done on government emails, and that if you did use a private email, that it should be turned over. That's what she's doing as recently as you said a few minutes ago, and I think she has been asked about this multiple times, including by you, Andrea, and I think she said, look, to do it again, I'd probably made a mistake and I wouldn't do it, and she's working hard to comply with making sure that everything's pursuant to the Federal Records Act.
When you look at the other side, the Republicans, what do you make of Donald Trump?
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, I think really what resonates with people is a spirit of hopefulness. We have a great country. We're the greatest country on earth. And I don't think that we should ever tear it down. That doesn't mean we don't have challenges ahead, and it doesn't mean that there isn't great room for improvement. As I mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of hard work ahead. But I think what resonates ultimately with the American people is that spirit of hopefulness and confidence and spirit that believes in this country. And I think that as we have seen in the last election and the one before that, people go up and people go down in the course of the race, and it's a long race. And in the end, the president used to say, I remember this during the primary season of 2008, his first race, he said, you know, what was great about Iowa is that you got to go around the state and lift up your hood, and people would kick your tires and find out who you really are. And I think that's what's great about a democracy. And so that's why we have a long period of time where everybody gets to really get to know one another. And I think that's what's going to happen this time. How was that?
I was in New Hampshire when Donald Trump had that town hall meeting, and
you're just going to keep going there, aren't you?
Well, I want to ask you about that, because he did not contradict that man from the audience who was speaking offensively about Muslims in general and about Barack Obama particularly. And he said later, well, you know, the president wouldn't defend me, why should I defend him? But one recalls what John McCain did back in 2008 when a woman was similarly offensive about then.
Is
Barack
Senator
Obama.
McCain still in the House? I know he was here a minute ago. What he did was really, I thought, excellent. I thought it sent a really important message. And it's okay to disagree with somebody, but I don't know, you know, name calling is like something you're supposed to stop when you're much, much younger. And I think that and again, I mean, I'm quite serious. I'm not trying to avoid your question. We are a country that should celebrate diversity and strength. We are a country that believes in religious freedom and expression, and we should be embracing that. And ultimately, the reason why I'm not bothering to comment on any one particular thing that a candidate says is that ultimately I really do have confidence in the American people and their wisdom.
And the president, in this last year and what he is trying to accomplish. In his speech, the General Assembly, he laid out a vision on the 70th anniversary of the UN, but he sounded frustrated with the obstacles, the challenges. And if you contrast that to his speech in Cairo in 2009, one was filled with hope and change, if you will, and the speech this week seemed frustrated.
So I'll push back on you. I think obviously 6 years later, he has a experience that's been enriched by being the president of the United States at a very tumultuous time. I didn't feel that he was frustrated at all. I think, in a sense, the theme that I heard when he was running for office, that diplomacy is complicated and hard, but really important, and we shouldn't be afraid to engage with people because they have historically been our enemies, and whether it's Cuba or Iran, I think he has proven that that bold vision that he set forth then is now coming to fruition now. So I think that it's a consistent theme. Does he wish that the world were easier and that some of these problems that have proven to be quite intractable were easily solved? Well, of course he does. But I thought it was a very hopeful speech about the importance of the UN and the importance of diplomacy and how hard it can be. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
What are your hopes and his hopes for what the results, the payoff for the overture to Iran, the long secret negotiations, the arduous task of coming up with this nuclear agreement? What are your hopes for other kinds of contacts, assuming that the commitments are kept, that the delivery happens?
The whole purpose of that long negotiation was to ensure that Iran does not develop nuclear weapons. And we believe that this agreement is the best possible way of assuring that. So obviously time will tell. A lot of hard work is going to go into monitoring the compliance with the agreement and make sure that they do live up to their word. And that's a positive, I think that's a positive sign. I think the same thing could be said for changing our relations with Cuba. As the president said, you can try something for 50 years, and if it isn't working, don't be afraid to try something new. And I think that the meeting that he had while he was in New York with Castro was a constructive meeting. So I think these are two very good examples of where we cannot be isolationists. We cannot shrink. We are world leaders, and in order to do that, we can't fear engagement. And there's absolutely the only purpose of engagement is to make the world a safer place. And the world is shrinking by the day. Technology is bringing us all closer together. Challenges that maybe once upon a time the United States could face alone, we can no longer face alone, which is why it was so important to have the P+5 in the negotiations with Iran. This was not just the United States on its own. And I think that's the template going forward, is that we have to figure out how to be a part of the world and not live in isolation. We can't do it alone anymore.
Do you expect that President Obama would be able to go to Cuba before he leaves office?
We'll see. We'll see.
Normalize relations with Iran?
Yes, of course. These are all very positive steps to take. We'll see. Let's take it one day at a time. I think we've had a pretty good summer when you look at everything. I woke up this morning and I was trying to remember how many states legalized same-sex marriage when the president took office, and I guessed 4. I was wrong. It was 2. And before the Supreme Court decision, it was 37 plus the District of Columbia. And now it's everywhere. And so a lot can happen. And as the president said really eloquently that day in the Rose Garden, moving the arc of the moral universe towards justice, to inaccurately quote Martin Luther King, that arc is long, but it does bend towards justice. But sometimes it moves like a thunderbolt. And so I don't want to prejudge today what can happen in the next year plus, because a year ago, we probably wouldn't have predicted all of the progress we've made in this last year.
And at the same time this week, a lot of people were studying the body language of Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin.
Because they were both standing up?
Well, there weren't too many smiles. There was a handshake. But
a double handshake.
Awkward,
a shake and then another shake.
And then another shake. What is that relationship?
They're two leaders of very important countries, and I think that they have to work together, and they will where they can. They're going to disagree about some issues, and then they're going to work together. I think, again, another good example is Iran. At a time when we were having a clear conflict with Russia, we're able to have them as a partner. And I think that actually describes the president's overall approach. It's his approach to Congress. Right now, hopefully, momentarily, we're going to have a continuing resolution We see very positive signs about criminal justice reform, bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate to reform a system where we're spending $80 billion a year. And so we can work with one another, and we don't have to agree on everything to find common ground. And I think that's been the president's approach since he started in the state Senate in Springfield, Illinois. And I think that that's what he did when he was a U.S. Senator, and it's certainly what he's done both domestically and internationally since he's been the President of the United States.
Thank you so much, Valerie Jarrett.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for being
Thank you all.